Okay, this is going to be my foundational axiom. This is going to be the first idea from which I work, and that is that we all hate poetry. Now, this is extreme. I'm sure you all don't hate poetry, but some of you might. The question is why? Why do you hate poetry? Well, it probably goes back to some experience in some English class where you were asked to figure out what a group of words, what a poem meant, and it just seemed so random. It seemed so arbitrary, so subjective. And then someone told you were wrong, or even if they told you were right, you didn't know why you were right. Well, John Crow Ransom has a theory, and that theory is we hate poetry because it's just too hard. It's simply too hard. The way he puts it is this. He says, it demands an inordinate amount of our energy. I've had students say over and over again, almost every year, annually, like the swallows to Capistrano, why doesn't the poet just say what they mean? And my response is really frustrating to them, but it's honest and it's true. This is what the poet means. The poet is saying what the poet means. It's just their meaning is hard to digest. It's hard to get at, just like much of life. We tend to quit activities when they're too hard. The cost-benefit analysis says that we should do that. So we tend to quit reading poetry. It's just too hard. Not everyone can be in advanced physics. Not everyone can appreciate poetry. I'll tell you what we do like. We like memes. We like one-liners. We like catchphrases. We like jokes. Why? Because we get it. They're easy. They're readily accessible to us and to everybody. We can share them. All right? They're mindless. They're easy to consume. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's great. We should all participate in them. Memes are fun, but they're not the be-all and the end-all. They tend to shut down thinking. They tend to avoid nuance. They tend to troll the opposition and not respect it. They are fundamentally anti-intellectual. They don't approach the world from what you might call a plenary point of view, where you're trying to see everything in its fullness rather than just your own limited point of view. So memes are great, but they're not poems. There's a place for poems just like there's a place for memes. Let's consider how poetry challenges us by looking at Richard Brautigan's poem, Critical Can Opener. Richard Brautigan is one of my favorite poets. He's a hippie poet from Haight-Ashbury back in the 60s. He wrote this poem. There is something wrong with this poem. Can you find it? The end. Do you get it? I know you want to say it's stupid because it's just so obvious. It's simple and simplistic, but I would say no, it is not simplistic. It's hard to get. You need to think about it. There is something wrong with this poem. Can you find it? It's hard to find what he means in there. What does he intend? That might be the point. This isn't stupid. It's really hard. I encourage you not to hate what you can't understand. Rather, buckle up, get comfortable, and go to work until you do understand it, because I'm here to help you. All right, so how do we understand what Brautigan is getting at? How do we understand what any poet is getting at? I'm going to recommend that we use a two-part reading process. And this process requires a lot of sophistication, and it seems contradictory at times. Here's what I mean. I call the first part of the process the heresy of paraphrase. It is a ritual that we are going to perform. All right, what do I mean by that? Okay, let's look at the words. Heresy. What is heresy? It is the opposite of orthodoxy. What is orthodoxy? Orthodoxy are the set of rules that an authority makes, which a subject must follow. It's like a test. You must follow them. If you do, then you are orthodox and you are acceptable to the authority. However, if you do not follow them, then you are a heretic. You are a resistor. You are opposition. Okay, so heresy is an opposition. It is a resistance to. So what are we resisting? What is so wrong to do? Paraphrase. Paraphrase means summary. It means to simply say what something is about in a word or two. It's to flatten things out. Cleanth Brooks is the critic, the new critic who created this phrase. This is a bad thing. Do not, he says, just say what a poem is about. That is not good criticism. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. If your criticism, if your analysis of that poem is, it's a poem about making decisions, Brooks says, well, that's insufficient. You get a D. That's poor. At least you showed up and tried. Thank you. There's a home version of the game for you as a parting gift, but you're not going to be invited back to the show. You stopped at paraphrase. That's a heresy. That's bad. All right, so I can hear what you're saying because I know that you're smart. You're saying, okay, so if Cleanth Brooks, so high and mighty, literary critic, is saying that I shouldn't be performing the heresy of paraphrase, why are you, teacher, saying that I should? Why should I do the thing that is heretical? Why are you setting me up for failure? That is a great question. Here's my answer. I still think we need to start someplace. All trips begin by knowing where you are to begin with. So if I want to go to Los Angeles, I need to know that I'm in Ann Arbor so that I can get on 23 South, 75 South, and then try and go east to west and then take one of the routes west and south to Los Angeles. There are many ways to get there, but I need to know where to start before I make choices about whether I'm going the northern route through Denver, whether I'm going the southern route through Phoenix. All of those decisions begin with understanding where we are. So yeah, Robert Frost's poem is about making decisions. But if we stop there, then Cleanth Brooks has got us dead to rights. We are heretics. We aren't respecting poetry. That leads me to the second part of our process. Okay, now that we know where we start, now we understand what city we begin from. Now we know what the poem is about. It's about making choices, right? Then we do this very important thing. We ask, how does the form inform the meaning? Because it's poetry, how it sounds, how it appears on the page, how parts of it relate to other parts of it is absolutely essential. And again, this is what John Crow Ransom means when he says it demands an inordinate amount of our attention. It's like trying to do a very high level crossword puzzle, Sudoku, any kind of thought puzzle or thought game. Or insight games, they're sometimes called. If you like those, you are going to like poetry. If you don't like those, you're probably not going to like poetry. You're probably not going to like electrical engineering. You're probably not going to like studying Einsteinian general and special relativity, right? These are things that can sometimes be contradictory and require that you hold a bunch of ideas in your head simultaneously, right? So when we ask the question, how does form inform meaning? What we're doing is we are trying to determine what is called the tone. What is tone? Because this is an important critical vocabulary word. I'm going to be asking about it all year long. You need to know it. What is the tone? Answer: the speaker's attitude towards the message. So let's take a look at what I mean by that. If we were in class together, I would say, okay, who is the most sincere, the most trustworthy student in the class when they give you a message? And then I would ask them to say these words as sincerely as they possibly could, right? Dr. Randolph is really cool, right? That's about as sincere as I can get when I say that without busting up in laughter, okay? Then I would ask, who is the most sarcastic student in the class? Who is the biggest Sasquatch? Who's the biggest sass muffin? And that person would then have a chance to say the exact same words, but sarcastically. And they would say something like, and have said something like in the past, Dr. Randolph is really cool. The way the voice is manipulated tells you everything that you need to know about the words that are spoken. It reminds me of when my mom used to say to me, young man, I don't like the tone of your voice. I mean, she couldn't argue with the words. I'm sorry. Have you had that before? That's not a really sincere apology. I'm sorry, class, that I gave you too much work and that you buckled under the pressure. And then someone would come in and say, yeah, you're not really sorry, Randolph. Apologize again, but be sincere. What we're talking about is tone. Tone is everything. You can't say things and then walk them back later by saying, oh, but my tone was sarcastic then. That is, poets would, I don't care what your agenda is, they would pull their hair out, they would jump up and down and speak in tongues. You have to speak precisely, or as Hamlet says to Horatio, speak by the card or equivocation will undo us. You need to know the words on the page precisely, and you need to be able to control the tone. Now, sometimes that means that the tone is not clear. That's the control that it's under. So we'll get to that here. So these are called couplets. They're intended to rhyme or not rhyme. Bright, night, you recognize that, all right? It's a simple, easy nursery rhyme like rhyme. But I, symmetry, is that a rhyme? Is that not a rhyme? Again, that sort of simple menial sensibility would say that's not a rhyme. But can you dismiss it so easily? Symmetry, I. What you realize is there's a world of play between that's a rhyme and that's not a rhyme. That world of play can be multiple syllables rhyming with one syllable. The agreement of certain vowel sounds like the I sound in bright and night, or just the sound, the repeated sound of the consonants. There are many different ways in which language connects through sound and sight on the page with other words. And that connection is the thing that we have to be alert to. I, in symmetry, its failure to connect is an important connection. And that is the thing that we need to understand. When things break down, when you find problems, you are probably at the very heart of the matter. That is the new thing that we need to consider when we talk about how form informs meaning. Problems are the heart of the matter. When things get hard, when things get difficult, when things get really complicated and you don't know a simple answer, that's when we need to be called in, because we are going to look at these things, examine them in a nuanced and thoughtful, sophisticated fashion. All right, let's take a look at another poem that's somewhat similar. The first 4 lines of a longish poem that we'll look at later in the year by W.B. Yeats about a moment in history, Easter 1916. It was the day in which the Declaration of Independence for the Republic of Ireland was read out at the beginning of a rebellion, a violent rebellion, right? So here's how Yeats begins. I have met them at the close of day, coming with vivid faces from counter or desk among gray 18th century houses. Well, we have the same question. What do we do with the end rhymes? Day, gray, night, bright. Those are right on. We have the same vowel sound ending the line. So it's pretty easy. But what about faces and houses? If you want to say that's not a rhyme because the long A of faces doesn't match up with the diphthong of houses, you're right. But what about the sibilant sounds, the S sounds, faces, houses? Are you going to actually claim that Yeats just happened to put those together because that's the word he needed and he didn't think about the sounds? I can't buy that, right? If I couldn't accept that Yeats was trying to do something here, I couldn't get on an airplane and believe that the engineering of an airplane would actually keep me safe off the ground. People can figure these things out. People can engineer these things. You can't tell me that a person can engineer an airplane, but they can't engineer an off rhyme between faces and houses. That's just absurd to me. So I want to argue that Yeats is doing this on purpose. If he's not, then I have to admit to you, he's a crummy poet. He's no better than I am as a poet. But having read a bunch of his poems, what I've come to understand is he does things on purpose because I see him doing things on purpose all the time throughout his entire body of work. I might do things arbitrarily, but W.B. Yeats doesn't. Neither does Shakespeare, neither do any of our other writers. Okay? And if they do, we need to try and evaluate them, and maybe they don't belong in our curriculum. But I want to argue that Day and Gray is intended to be on and easy and simple, and it's immediately complicated by faces and houses. Because just like the I in symmetry off rhyme, the poet is going to have trouble reading the faces of these people. These people are people who actually are participating in the armed rebellion against the British Empire, which will ultimately lead to the establishment of the Irish Republic and also the partition of the island into the Irish Republic in Northern Ireland in 1920. So there's an awful lot at stake here.